I never wanted to step foot inside a mansion again, not after the last time cost me everything. But when the car stopped before the DeLuca estate and the iron gates groaned open, something in my chest twisted tighter than the scarf around my throat, a warning and a pull at the same time. The kind of feeling that whispers this is where your life changes whether you're ready or not, and I wasn't ready, not even close. Yet I climbed out and stared up at the villa that sat like a crown over the Sicilian hills, sunlight sliding along its marble walls, as if the house itself knew it was untouchable, just like the man who ruled it, Matteo DeLuca, the name everyone in Palermo spoke with a mix of awe and fear, the name that had once made my heart skip for another reason entirely, the name that still belonged to the father of my child though he didn't know it, though he believed both of us had died years ago. And maybe that was the cruelest truth of all, that fate had brought me back here not as his lover but as his daughter's nanny. The guard who opened my door didn't smile. None of them ever did. He checked my documents, fake ones that said my name was Alina Morty, age 29, experienced in childcare and speech therapy, hired through a private agency. Everything about me was a lie except the reason I came. When I entered the main hall, silence pressed down like smoke after a gunshot. The marble floors gleamed, the chandelier above glittered like frozen lightning. I could smell polished wood, expensive wine, and faint gunpowder, the kind of scent that never truly leaves a Mafia home. Then I heard footsteps, steady, heavy, deliberate, and when he appeared at the top of the stairs, my lungs forgot how to work. Matteo DeLuca looked almost the same, only colder. His black suit fit like it had been sewn straight onto his skin. His eyes, dark as midnight espresso, cut through me as if they could peel the truth off my bones. He stopped halfway down, studying me with that sharp silence that once used to precede his smile. But there was no smile now, only suspicion. "You're the nanny?" he asked, voice deep, accented, the rough Sicilian edges softening each word just enough to be dangerous. I nodded because words trembled inside my throat like trapped birds. "Yes, Signor DeLuca," I managed. "From the agency." He descended the remaining steps, every movement precise, a man used to control, used to fear. "My daughter doesn't speak," he said. "She doesn't like strangers. If she screams, you're gone. If she cries for more than 5 minutes, you're gone. If she touches a gun," his gaze flicked to me, "you're gone." I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because the man I once knew had always hidden his kindness behind threats, a habit born from surviving his father's world. "Understood," I whispered. He turned away without another glance, and a woman in a gray uniform appeared from the corridor, gesturing for me to follow. The hallways twisted like a maze of secrets. My shoes made no sound on the thick Persian carpets. On every wall hung paintings of power, ancestors in tailored suits, ships in stormy seas, saints bleeding gold. The house was a cathedral of silence until the maid stopped before a white door and said softly, "She's inside." My heart stumbled. I pushed the door open. Sunlight spilled across a room full of toys untouched. In the corner sat a small figure with dark curls and wide hazel eyes staring out the window. Eva, my Eva. My throat burned as I stepped closer. She didn't turn, she just kept tracing circles on the glass with her finger, lost in her own quiet world. "Hello," I whispered, careful not to scare her. "I'm Alina." She didn't react. I crouched near her, my hands trembling. "Do you like drawing?" Slowly she glanced at me, and that tiny movement broke me inside. Her eyes were the same mixture of mine and Matteo, a color that couldn't be faked. She picked up a small pad from the floor and drew 2 circles, a big one and a small one, and then pointed from the small circle to herself. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "That's you," she nodded. Then she drew another circle, hesitated, and looked at me again as if testing whether I'd understand. She lifted her hand and touched my wrist, then pointed to the second circle. My eyes blurred. She didn't know, not consciously, but something in her remembered me. I wanted to pull her into my arms and never let go, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed time, proof, safety. I nodded instead. "That's me," I said softly. "We can draw together, see?" She didn't answer, but she didn't move away either, and in that small victory my heart found enough strength to keep beating. I stayed with her until evening. Matteo didn't appear again, but I felt his presence everywhere, like a storm behind a door. Every creak, every shadow, every glance from the guards reminded me this was not just a house. It was a fortress built on secrets and blood. When I finally stepped outside for air, the sky was melting into gold and crimson. I could hear the faint crash of waves beyond the cliffs. That was when I saw him again, standing near the balcony, smoking. The last time I saw that posture, he had just held me after Eva was born. Now he looked carved from stone. "How did she behave?" he asked without turning. "Quiet," I said, "but she listens, she watches everything." "She doesn't speak," he said again, as if to remind me. "She hasn't spoken in 3 years." "Sometimes silence is safer," I replied before I could stop myself. He finally turned, the corner of his mouth twitching. "You think you know about safety, Signora Morty?" I met his gaze. "I know what fear looks like in a child's eyes." For a moment, something flickered behind his cold mask, but then it vanished. He crushed the cigarette and walked past me, leaving the scent of smoke and cedar in the air. That night, lying in the small room they gave me at the edge of the house, I couldn't sleep. Memories pressed against the dark. Mateo's laughter years ago, the way his hand fit around mine, the sound of Eva's first cry before Don Ricardo's men tore her from me. I had spent years running, hiding, surviving, but fate had a cruel sense of humor. It brought me back into the lion's den disguised as help. And the lion no longer recognized the lamb he once loved. Mateo didn't appear at breakfast the next morning, only his voice drifting through a doorway as he spoke to someone about shipments and numbers that meant danger. I tried not to listen, though every syllable of that low Italian rumble hooked at the corners of my memory. Eva sat beside me at the table, carefully cutting her toast into even squares she never ate. I drew a small heart on her napkin with a pen, and she blinked at it, then glanced up to check that no one was watching before tracing the same shape onto my wrist with her fingertip. That tiny secret gesture kept me steady for the rest of the day. The staff avoided me. To them, I was another stranger who wouldn't last a week. By the third evening, Mateo came home late, smelling of rain and smoke. He saw Eva asleep on the sofa with her head in my lap and stopped in the doorway. His eyes softened, almost imperceptibly, and for one impossible moment I thought he remembered. Then the hardness returned, the boss again. "She sleeps easily with you," he said. "That's new." I smiled faintly. "Children know who feels safe. Safe isn't something I offer. Maybe not to everyone." The silence that followed was full of questions neither of us dared ask. That night I lay awake listening to the distant hum of Mateo's car engines coming and going beyond the gates, each sound another reminder that the world outside this room belonged to him, and that everything inside my chest still did too, though I had promised myself I would never love him again. When the house finally quieted, I rose and walked to Eva's room, drawn by something I couldn't name. She was dreaming, her small hand twitching as if signing words in her sleep, fragments of the language we shared. I touched her forehead lightly and whispered a lullaby in Italian, the one I used to sing when she was a baby. My voice cracked halfway through, and I bit my lip to keep from sobbing. The next morning, Mateo appeared in the garden while Eva chased butterflies among the lemon trees. He watched her with an expression I hadn't seen before, tender, uncertain. "She used to laugh," he said quietly, not looking at me. "Before the fire." His father's lie again. I had died in that fire, and Mateo had believed it. "Maybe she just needs a reason to laugh again," I said. He turned to me then, the sun catching in his eyes, and for a heartbeat the silence between us wasn't sharp but fragile, almost gentle. Then his phone rang, and the moment shattered. He barked orders in rapid Sicilian, the tone of a man used to being obeyed. When he ended the call, his jaw was tight. "You'll keep her inside today, no garden. Is something wrong? It's better you don't know." He walked away, his coat flaring behind him like a dark wing, and I understood that whatever his business was, it was closing in. The day passed with a heavy stillness that tasted of rain and unspoken fear. I kept Eva near me, reading picture books and teaching her small hand signs for words she already knew, but liked to repeat. Every few minutes I looked toward the window, half expecting to see Mateo's car return, half afraid it would. By sunset, thunder rolled over the hills, and the house filled with the restless movements of guards checking doors and radioing short-coded phrases. I sat with Eva in the library pretending to read while my heart pounded against every sound outside. When the front doors finally slammed open and Mateo strode in, wet from the storm, his expression stopped the room cold. There was blood on his sleeve, someone else. He peeled off his gloves and threw them on the table. "Upstairs," he ordered one of the men. Then he saw us. The rage in him faltered, replaced by something raw and weary. "It's fine," he said to me in a lower voice, almost gentle. "It's over." But I could see it was. The storm outside had followed him in. It clung to him, alive. I moved toward Eva, shielding her without meaning to, and his gaze dropped to my hands on her shoulders. For a moment he looked as though he wanted to say something, then simply turned and walked away. Later that night, I heard his study door slam again and again until the noise became part of the thunder. When silence finally came, I couldn't help myself. I went to him. The door was unlocked. Matteo sat at his desk staring at a single glass of whiskey, the muscles in his forearms drawn tight. He didn't look up when I entered, just said, "You shouldn't be here. You're bleeding." "It's nothing." I crossed to him anyway, my pulse loud in my ears, and took a napkin from the tray to dab at the cut on his arm. He tensed but didn't move away. Up close I could smell rain, smoke, and the faint sweetness of his cologne. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then he whispered almost to himself, "You remind me of someone I lost." My breath caught, but I kept my hand steady. "Maybe she's closer than you think," I said softly. His eyes lifted to mine then, dark and searching, and for the first time since I arrived, the space between us felt like a bridge instead of a wall. He didn't answer me, only stared until the air felt thick enough to touch. Then he leaned back, breaking the gaze with a rough exhale that might have been a laugh or a sigh. "Go to sleep, Alina," he said. "Tomorrow she'll need you." I wanted to tell him I already belonged to the need he was trying to describe, that Eva was the heartbeat I'd lost, but the words stayed locked behind my teeth. I left the room without another sound, yet the image of him sitting there with his glass and his ghosts followed me through the corridor. That night I dreamed of fire, the old one, the one that had stolen everything, and woke before dawn with tears on my cheeks. Eva was still asleep, her hair a dark halo against the pillow. I brushed it from her face and whispered a promise I couldn't keep. "Soon, my love, soon he'll know." When morning came, the house was strangely quiet, even the guards seemed to move slower, wary. I found Matteo in the garden again, this time in shirt sleeves, hands deep in the soil of a small rose bed. The sight shocked me. "You garden?" I asked before I could stop myself. He didn't look up. "My mother used to." She said it kept the blood on her hands from staining her soul. He glanced at me then, a flicker of challenge in his eyes. "Does that surprise you? Everything about you surprises me." "That's dangerous," he murmured. I crouched opposite him, helping to clear a few fallen petals. The scent of roses mixed with damp earth and something warmer, the memory of the man who had once laughed in the rain with me years ago. Eva appeared at the window, watching us. For the first time since I arrived, she smiled. Matteo followed my gaze and saw her. Something in his expression melted, only for a heartbeat, but it was enough. "You're good for her," he said quietly. "Maybe for me too." He stood and walked away before I could reply, leaving me kneeling among the roses with my heart trembling like the petals at my feet. The following weeks unfolded like a slow-burn secret. Eva began to trust me more, speaking through her hands with small bursts of laughter that made the house feel alive again. Matteo watched from the edges, always half present, half buried beneath his business. I learned quickly never to ask where he went when the phone rang after midnight. Sometimes he returned with bruises hidden under the collar of his shirt, sometimes with eyes so dark they looked almost hollow. Yet every morning he joined us for breakfast, as if he could pretend away the violence that paid for the gold cutlery on the table. The staff obeyed him with a devotion that was part fear, part worship. I obeyed him because I couldn't seem to do anything else. One evening, a new car rolled into the courtyard, sleek, silver, foreign. The woman who stepped out of it was the kind who left perfume trails like promises, tall, blonde, dressed in white that never touched the ground. "Francesca," Matteo said tightly, "you weren't expected. You never expect me, darling. That's what keeps us interesting." Her eyes slid to me, calculating. "And who's this, the help?" "The nanny," he said, but his voice carried a warning that made her smirk. "How generous of you to hire someone so ordinary." I swallowed the sting and smiled politely. Matteo didn't look at her, he looked at me as though checking if her cruelty had reached its mark. Later, after dinner, he found me in the hallway. "Ignore her," he said. "She's my father's idea of a future. She seems to think she already is." He almost smiled. "My father thinks marriage is a business merger. I think it's a battlefield." "And what do you think love is?" The question escaped before I could stop it. He stared for a long moment, then whispered, "Something people like me don't get to keep." He turned away then, leaving me with the echo of his truth. That night when I tucked Eva in, she signed a single word, love, then pointed to me, then to her father. My hands froze midair. She giggled silently, unaware of the storm her innocent gesture had set free inside me. I spent the rest of the night packing, torn between what I had lost and what I was beginning to find again. The day Matteo's father arrived, The air turned colder before he even stepped through the doors. I was in the library helping Eva with her drawing when the sound of polished shoes and the clipped rhythm of an old man's authority echoed through the hall. He entered without waiting to be announced, tall and still powerful despite his age, eyes like Mateo's but harder. "So," he said, surveying the room as if it belonged to him, "this is the woman my son hides in his house." Mateo followed behind him, jaw tight, voice low. "She's the nanny, not that it's your concern." "Everything about you is my concern, Mateo. You forget the family you carry on your shoulders." His gaze landed on Eva, softening for a brief second, then turned to me again, sharp as glass. "You," he said, "you should remember where you are. People who wander into this family rarely wander out." I kept my expression neutral, even as my stomach twisted. Mateo stepped between us. "Enough, you're a guest, not my conscience." The old man's mouth curved in a thin smile. "A guest doesn't bring police files to dinner, son. A father does." The tension between them filled the air like smoke. After he left, Mateo didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "He doesn't trust anyone I hire. He thinks everyone wants something from us." I met his gaze. "Do you?" he asked suddenly. "Do you want something from me?" "Just peace," I said. "For Eva, for myself." He studied me a long time, then reached out as if to touch my hand but stopped halfway. "Peace," he repeated. "You're in the wrong house for that." That night I overheard Mateo and his father arguing in the study. Words like control, succession, and weakness floated through the door, each one striking like a stone. When it finally went quiet, I found Mateo sitting in the dark, his head in his hands. "He wants to take her away," he said when he noticed me. "Eva, he says she belongs in the old villa, that I'm unfit to raise her." "He can't," I whispered, my heart racing. "You won't let him. He'll find a way, he always does." I wanted to tell him the truth then, that no one had more right to that child than I did, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I walked to him and laid a hand on his shoulder. He looked up at me, something fragile flickering behind his eyes. "Stay," he said quietly. "Just stay." And I did. Days turned into nights that blurred together under the same roof, tension and tenderness weaving into something neither of us could name. Mateo tried to act unchanged, burying himself in the same grim meetings and late-night calls, but I could feel the shift. The air around us was heavier, charged with words we never said. I saw it in the way his hand lingered when he passed me a cup, in the silence that followed whenever our eyes met. Eva noticed too. She would grin when he entered the room, then glance between us like she was keeping a secret. Francesca's visits became more frequent, each time sharper, her perfume thick enough to choke on. "You're wasting yourself on sentiment," she told Mateo one afternoon when she thought I was out of earshot. "That woman will ruin you." He answered too softly for me to hear, but when he left the room his expression was dark and his fists were clenched. That night I found him outside on the balcony, staring at the city lights. "You should sleep," I said quietly. "It's late." "So is everything else," he muttered, then looked at me. "You ever wonder if peace is just another lie?" "No," I said. "It's just harder to keep than war." He gave a tired laugh, one that broke something in me. "You talk like you've lived both." Maybe I have. We stood in silence, the night wind carrying the scent of rain and jasmine. Then, as if pulled by gravity, he reached out and touched my cheek. The warmth of his hand stole my breath. "Tell me who you really are," he whispered. I wanted to, but fear wrapped around my throat like a chain. "Does it matter?" I asked. He didn't answer, just stepped closer until his forehead rested against mine. "Everything about you matters." When he kissed me, it was slow, hesitant, the kind of kiss that carried both apology and confession. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Then a door slammed somewhere below and the spell broke. He pulled away, his jaw tightening. "I shouldn't have, but you did," I said. He turned from me, shoulders rigid. "If my father finds out, he'll destroy you." "Then don't let him." For the first time, he smiled without sorrow. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "Maybe I do," I whispered, though he couldn't know how true that was. Behind us, lightning flashed over the hills. In that white burst of light, I saw both our fates reflected in each other's eyes, love and ruin, twined together like blood and roses. The storm that night refused to fade. By morning, the house was heavy with silence. Even the staff seemed to move slower, sensing that something fragile had shifted. Mateo avoided me at breakfast, his expression composed but distant, and I felt the loss like a bruise beneath my skin. Eva, however, was bright as ever, signing questions I couldn't answer, why her father looked sad, why I wouldn't smile back. I told her stories instead, the kind she loved. about angels who lost their wings and still learned to fly. When Mateo finally appeared at the doorway, I thought he might join us, but behind him stood his father, watching like a shadow made flesh. "A word," the older man said, his tone polite in the way knives are polished. Mateo followed him into the study, the door closing sharply behind them. Curiosity burned through my restraint. I lingered by the hall until the muffled voices rose. "You're distracted," his father said. "I can smell it on you. That woman has you tangled and you forget who you are." Mateo's answer was cold steel. "I haven't forgotten. You just never let me become anything else. You think love will wash your hands clean? You'll end up like your mother, weak, bleeding, betrayed." Silence stretched, then a crash, something glass shattering. I flinched. "Get out," Mateo hissed, and for the first time I heard something close to fear in his father's breath before he left. When Mateo stepped out moments later, his face was pale, a cut blooming red along his knuckle. He saw me, froze, and his voice softened. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should he," I said quietly. He almost smiled at that, then walked past me toward the balcony again, the storm outside echoing his mood. That evening, Francesca came with gifts, an excuse to stay. Eva clung to me, refusing to greet her. I didn't blame her. Francesca poured wine, speaking too loudly about a gala, a marriage, a future written in headlines. Mateo ignored her until she mentioned his father's plan to move Eva to the villa in Rome. His glass stopped halfway to his lips. "That won't happen," he said. "It already is," she replied sweetly. "Papers signed this morning." My heart lurched. Eva didn't understand, but she felt the tension. She pressed against my leg, eyes wide. Mateo stood, every inch the Mafia heir he was born to be. "Tell him," he said softly, "that if he tries to take her, he'll start a war he can't finish." Francesca's smile faltered. "And you think you can win against your own blood? I don't lose what's mine." He looked at me when he said it. The message was clear, and it wasn't only about his daughter. That night he came to my room, rain in his hair, a decision burning in his gaze. "Pack your things," he said. "We're leaving at dawn." "Where?" "Somewhere he can't touch her. Or me. Especially you." Left before sunrise, the sky a dull bruise over the hills. Mateo drove himself, no guards, no convoy, just the hum of the engine and Eva asleep in the back seat. The roads curved through fog and forest, the world shrinking to the rhythm of rain on the windshield. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice sounded scraped raw. "My father has eyes everywhere. If he wanted to find us, he would. But I need time to think, to keep her safe." I nodded, clutching my coat around me. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was something heavier, filled with all the words we hadn't dared say. By noon, we reached a small seaside town where no one seemed to know his name. Mateo rented a house on the cliffs, old but quiet, its windows facing the endless gray water. For the first time since I entered his world, there were no guards, no cameras, no whispers in the halls, just the three of us. Eva ran from room to room, delighted by the echo of her footsteps. Watching her, Mateo smiled, an unguarded, boyish smile that made him look years younger. "She deserves this," he said softly. "A childhood that isn't locked behind gates." I wanted to tell him she'd had one once, brief and beautiful, before fire and betrayal turned it to ash, but instead I said, "She's happy because she feels safe." He looked at me then, really looked, as if hearing something deeper in my voice. "You talk like you've lost a child," he said quietly. My heart stuttered, but I forced a small laugh. "Maybe I've just seen too much." He didn't believe me. I saw it in his eyes, the suspicion flickering there like the flame of a match. That night after Eva fell asleep, I found him sitting on the terrace with a file open on his lap, photographs, reports, hospital records. He looked up when I stepped into the light. "I found something," he said, "about the accident that took Eva's mother. It wasn't an accident." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "There was another woman in the car. Her name was Alina Morty. She was declared dead, but there's no body, no proof, just a file that ends." He met my eyes, and in that instant I knew the lie was finished. "Who are you?" he whispered. The world tilted, my knees felt weak. "The woman in that file," I said at last, my voice barely more than breath. "I'm Eva's mother." For a long moment he didn't move at all, just stared as if the air between us had turned to glass. Then he stood, slow and deliberate, the papers sliding from his lap to the floor. "You expect me to believe that?" he said, voice low and dangerous. "That the woman who walked into my house pretending to be a stranger is the same one my men told me died 5 years ago?" I swallowed hard. "I didn't pretend to be anything. I came because I needed to see her again. I thought I could stay invisible." "Invisible?" He laughed once bitterly. "You live under my roof, hold my daughter, lie to my face, and call it invisible." I stepped closer, shaking. "I was protecting her." From me, his words cut like knives. From my family, I whispered. From your father, he wanted me gone. That fire, it wasn't an accident. He knew about us, Mateo, about what we were before. Stop. His hands clenched. Don't rewrite the past to make me the fool. You think I would risk everything for a lie? I don't know what you do anymore. The silence that followed felt endless, broken only by the sea crashing below the cliffs. Then, softer, almost broken, he said, "You should have told me. Would you have believed me?" His jaw worked, but he didn't answer. I turned toward the door. "If you want us to go, we will." He caught my arm. "You're not taking her anywhere. She's my daughter. She's our daughter." The words hung between us, raw and aching. For the first time, he looked at me not as an intruder, but as something lost returned. His grip loosened. "My father did this," he said slowly, realization dawning in his eyes. "He made me believe you were dead." I nodded, tears finally spilling. "He said it was mercy, that if I stayed gone, she'd live." Mateo turned away, fury trembling through him. "Then he's going to pay for what he's done." I stepped forward, grabbing his hand. "No more blood, Mateo, not for me." He looked back, eyes dark and wet. "He took everything from us. You think I can let that stand?" "You have us now," I said. "Don't lose it again." He didn't answer, but his silence wasn't rejection. It was war, building quietly behind his eyes. Outside, thunder rolled over the sea, and I knew the storm we'd been running from had finally found us. The morning after my confession, the house felt too small to contain what had been said. Mateo barely slept. I heard him packing until dawn, the floorboards creaking like they shared his anger. When the first light bled through the windows, he was already dressed in black, phone in hand, voice low and sharp. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the tone, orders, threats, a war being drawn without weapons yet visible. I waited until Eva woke, brushed her hair, signed to her that we'd go to the sea later. Pretending to be calm was the only protection I had left. Mateo appeared in the doorway, silent for a long moment before saying, "He's coming here." My stomach dropped. "Your father," he nodded. "He knows, he always knows." He looked at me then, softer. "I'm not letting him take her, or you. You don't have to fight him." "You don't understand," he said quietly. "My father doesn't talk, he decides, and the world bends." He left before I could answer. The hours until sunset stretched forever. The sea kept roaring, gray and restless. When the car finally appeared on the winding road, I felt it before I saw it, the weight of the past arriving in polished steel. Mateo met him outside, rain just starting to fall. I watched from the window, heart pounding. His father stepped out slowly, flanked by men who looked more like statues than guards. They faced each other in silence, 2 generations carved from the same stone. Then the older man spoke, calm and cold. "So this is where you hide your mistakes." Mateo's answer was steady. "This is where I protect my family." "Family?" The man's mouth curved. "That woman lied to you, she lied to us all." "You lied first," Mateo said. "You took my life from me, my child, my wife." For a moment, even the sea went quiet. "You were weak," the older man said. "Love makes men like us weak." "Then I'll be weak," Mateo said, "and I'll still be more than you ever were." He turned slightly toward the house then, and our eyes met through the glass. Something unspoken passed between us, a promise, a plea. His father's voice came again, rougher now. "If you walk away from this family, you walk away from everything." Mateo's reply was a whisper carried by the wind. "Then watch me." He came back inside drenched and shaking, but when he looked at me, there was peace in his eyes. "It's done," he said. "He won't stop," I whispered. "He already has," he said quietly, "because now he knows the one thing he can't control, love." Next days passed like a strange calm after a hurricane. Mateo's men arrived quietly, removing anything that tied the house to his father's reach. I saw in their eyes that the old man still ruled the city, but for now he had stepped back, wounded by his son's defiance. Mateo spent hours with Eva, walking the cliffs, teaching her to skip stones. She laughed without sound but with light. Every movement of her hands carried music I could almost hear. At night, when the house slept, he would find me by the window, and the silence between us was no longer filled with fear. It was full of knowing. One evening he said, "When I thought you were gone, I built walls to survive. Now you're here and I don't know how to live without them." I took his hand. "Then let them fall." He kissed me, not desperate, not angry, but like a man finally breathing. The days grew warmer. We took Eva into town, and for the first time people saw Mateo not as a name whispered in fear, but as a father carrying his daughter on his shoulders. His laughter in the sunlight startled even him. There were letters from the city, none opened. Francesca's perfume lingered on one envelope, but he tossed it into the fire without reading. We don't owe them any more of our life, he said. We only owe truth to her. He looked at Eva, who smiled and reached for both our hands. Weeks later, we returned to the villa, not to hide, but to reclaim it. Mateo's father watched from his chair in the courtyard, smaller now, a man finally aging. He said nothing when Mateo introduced me as his wife, only nodded once, the gesture of a man conceding to a world he could no longer command. The ceremony was simple, just us, the sea, the roses his mother once planted blooming again. Eva stood between us, holding the rings. When Mateo spoke his vows, his voice shook. I used to believe love made me weak, he said, but loving you gave me something my enemies will never touch, peace. I answered, you found me in the ruins and made me whole again. When we kissed, the bells of the old church below the hill began to ring, though no one had touched them. Some said it was the wind, I liked to think it was blessing. That night, with Eva asleep and the world finally quiet, Mateo stood at the balcony watching the stars. Do you think they ever really forget us? He asked softly. I joined him, resting my head on his shoulder. The stars or the ghosts, he smiled faintly. Both. Then let them remember, I said. We survived. Turned, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and whispered, you were chosen once to be her nanny. Now you're my reason. And in that small house by the sea, surrounded by roses and ghosts, I finally believed that even in the world of men who live by power and blood, love could still exist.